Hello, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Bedtime Stories. I am your host, MacLeod the Bard. What is a bard? Well, I'm glad you asked. A bard is a storyteller from ancient times, tasked with the telling of the history, law, morals, and genealogy of a people, through the use of the spoken word and musical accompaniment. To that end, I have with me my trusty Celtic lyre to assist me with this most ancient of tasks. Nowadays, stories are more important than ever to remind us of our truest selves while we attempt to navigate this new, unmapped cyber age which we find ourselves in. Upon those unknown waters, let the work of the bard be the lighthouse that reminds you of the whispers in your heart and the memories from your dreams. As for myself, had I been born about one calendar month sooner, and about, 3,000 years earlier, I dare say my livelihood would have been well secured. Alas, I find myself, like you, my dear listener, in a most confusing time in the world, and so, for the time we have together, let us forget about the present for a moment, and instead dream of the past, and hope for the future. I am MacLeod the Bard, and this is Bedtime Stories. Now, the stories told in today's inaugural episode may be recognized by some of CFRU's most studious listeners, as these are the same ones which I told when I was invited to CFR Boo, the spookiest broadcast of the Halloween season. As several of our beloved listeners have asked about these stories, the least I could do is include them in our inaugural adventure. But be warned, dear listener, within these tales are the contents of nightmares that one cannot so easily awake from, and should the unlucky amongst us scream with terror in the middle of the night, MacLeod the Bard cannot be held responsible. This is the Song of the Sorrowing Harp. On the east coast of Scotland, in a castle hard by the North Sea, lived a lord who had two daughters, the elder one dark, the younger one fair. As sometimes happens, the siblings were rivals, although the younger sister did not know it, and the elder would not admit it. And something occurred between them which caused a ghost to speak. One day, a young lord came courting. Quite properly, he paid formal address to the elder sister, but his eyes always strayed to the younger. He rode by her at the hunt, he danced with her in the hall, and all the while the dark gaze of the elder sister followed him, though she made no complaint, instead biding her time. Early one morning, the elder maiden invited her sister to walk by the seashore. As they strolled, the fair sister spoke guilelessly about their dashing visitor. The elder sister spoke little, but at a place where the waves beat against the massive rocks, she acted. With a swift blow, she knocked her sister off balance and into the foaming sea below. The waves closed over the fair maiden's head and clawed at her with icy fingers. She rose, gasping to the surface, and screamed to her sister, but there was no response. She heard only the roaring of the waters and the sharp cries of seagulls as they wheeled in the sky above. The dark sister stood on the shore rocks, motionless as a carved statue. With a steady, unperturbed gaze, she watched her sister's hopeless struggle. The young maiden sank, rose again for a moment and cried out pitifully, then sank again beneath the surging skirts of foam. The Dark One kept her vigil there for a time, observing with satisfaction the violence of the waves. Then she ran home to her father's hall and, weeping, told a false tale of how her sister had slipped on the rocks and drowned. The people searched the shore for her, but could not find her body. They made great mourning in the months that followed. Afterward, the young lord, bereft of the fair sister, sought consolation with the dark sister, and this was gladly given. But the fair sister's body, drawn by wind and tide and cradled in the killing waves, drifted along the Scottish shores and into a calm lake, far from her father's lands. A miller at the loch's edge spied the golden hair stirring beneath the surface, and gently pulled the body from the water. It happened that a wandering minstrel, a harper famed throughout Scotland, was staying with the miller. He helped the man to give her a burial, and moved by her beauty, he took 3 strands of the golden hair and strung them into his harp. Eventually, the harper took leave of the miller and went on his way, traveling from castle to castle to perform before the lords of the land. In the months that followed, the harp played for the minstrel with a tenderness which brought tears to the eyes of its listeners, and the harper grew to cherish those golden strings. At length he came to the stronghold of the maiden's father, although he did not know it for what it was. The minstrel was welcomed and feasted, as was the custom then. In the evening, when the fires were lit and the flames cast flickering shadows in the hall, the man drew out his harp and set it before him, making ready to perform. The dark sister settled on a bench to listen, flanked by her father and the young lord she loved. But, before he could touch them, the golden strings shimmered in the firelight. They trembled of their own accord. A sweet, familiar voice eddied around the company, and when the dark sister heard the words it sang, her face grew pale and tight. Her fate had come upon her, and she well knew it. "Farewell to the lord my father," sang the harp softly. "Farewell to my lady mother." The harp paused, and the company watched in horrified silence. Then the strings spoke once more, this time loud and wailing. "And woe to my sister who murdered me." The Wife's Revenge. In Japan, there once lived a man who, by his vicious actions, made his wife into a ghost. The man's name was Iemon, his wife's was Oiwa, and his motive was that he desired another woman. Oiwa, barely risen from childbed, was given poison, which caused her hair to fall out in bloody handfuls, her eyes to start from their sockets, and her pretty mouth to blacken. All through this ordeal, Iemon sneered. Then he sent her away. In despair, both she and her infant son died. Iemon felt no remorse. Now he was free to do as he wished. Or so he thought. He soon found that his deed had a terrifying price. With a ghoul's fury, Oiwa appeared to him everywhere. If he sought peace in a tea-house, the lanterns, jovially painted in human likeness, instead assumed the staring eyes of Oiwa and mouthed curses at him. If he walked in a garden, he would find her there, wailing over her infant. Her bitter accusations sounded in his ears ceaselessly. Defiant, Iemon married his paramour, thinking that the ghost might realize the futility of further haunting. But when he lifted his lover's bridal veil at the wedding, the face looking back at him was Oiwa's. Howling, he drew his sword and beheaded the spectre. And then Iemon discovered Oiwa's final vengeance. He had murdered his bride, not the ghost. The Hooded Congregation. Amid the forested mountains of northern Sweden in centuries past, the long winter nights were crowded with the restless, greedy dead. The living, isolated for months in villages hidden amongst the fir trees, stayed indoors for the most part, for they knew the darkness did not belong to them. They knew that things could happen outside the safe circle of the hearth that were best not risked or even thought of. This was especially true in the bleak time around winter solstice, as a certain Christmas tale relates. In her cottage on a hillside, a woman was awakened early one Christmas morning by church bells echoing in the air. It was still dark, as it would be until almost noon at that time of year, but far below she saw that the doors of the village church were wide open, and its light was streaming out in welcome. Although unsure of the hour, it was clear that Christmas service was about to begin. In some haste, the woman dressed, wrapped herself in her warmest shawl, and taking a lantern to light her way, set out down the hill for the church. None of her neighbors were in view, and nothing broke the enveloping silence except the occasional crackle of ice falling from tree branches and the crunching of snow underfoot. As she neared the little church, she heard singing and walked faster, spurred by the thought of warmth and companionship. At the open church door, she set down her lantern and composed her thoughts for the day. Within the pews were rows of hooded heads. Her neighbors had been more alert than her, it seemed. Intoning psalms at the head of the congregation was a priest, robed not in pristine white of this great festival, but in indeterminate gray. He looked up at the woman peering into the church, and bent once more to his prayers, so that his face remained hidden. She crept up the aisles of chanting worshippers, searching for a place to sit. Then help came. A gentle hand grasped her wrist, and a soft voice spoke in her ear. "This way, dear one." Her rescuer guided her to the front of the church. The singers seated there shuffled sideways on the bench to make room, but such was their intentness on the hymn that no one looked up to greet her. She sat down meekly beside her guide and prepared to worship. Having settled herself, the woman turned to thank her helper, but the words died on her lips. The person beside her had thrown back her concealing hood. The woman recognized the face at once, although it was much changed. It was the face of her beloved sister, whom she herself had laid in her coffin that autumn, before the first snowfall. Her head was little more than gleaming bone, still adorned with pasty shreds of flesh. The lipless mouth stretched open to speak, and a gust of odor, a sweet, necrotic scent mixed with earth, swept across the living visitor. No sound came from the mouth. All around the woman eddied the almost toneless chant of the clustered congregation. The woman began to inch across the bench, and finally found her voice. "You are the dead!" she cried out sharply. At once, as if a spell had broken, the chanting stopped, and a profound and listening silence settled upon the congregation. Heads turned toward her, hoods fell back, shufflings and rustlings began, and whisperings without words. The woman felt a hand on her shoulder and jerked around. Behind her was a gleaming skeleton, and beside it another. All up and down the row swayed the shadowy figures of the dead. Some, still partially clothed in flesh, she recognized. They were people from the village, or had been not long ago. Here, A shoulder blade protruded from the rags of a dress. There, wisps of hair clung to a whitened skull. Some of the figures were no more than bone, and these she could not recognize. Some, no doubt dead the longest, had faded to almost transparent shadow. The congregation began to move, drifting in a blind and stumbling sort of way toward the living being among them. Her sister's voice was heard again. "They have heard you. Run, for they will have you with them if they can. They hunger for fresh company." The woman rose to her feet, as quiet as she could, but each skull turned at once in her direction, and bony fingers pointed. She edged off the bench and stepped into the aisle. Stepping as lightly as she could, she hurried down the aisle, but they swarmed behind her, unerringly following the sound of her footsteps. She ran, the stench of death at her back as she felt sharp prodding. A hand grasped her shoulder. Fingers clutched at her shawl as she gained the door, and she slipped from the fabric and leaped out into the cold night air. Behind her, a single howl issued from the church. And that was all. She made for her priest's house, to find him awake and preparing for Christmas Mass. At her tail, the priest himself, holding his crucifix high before him, led her back to the church. The church was empty and peaceful. The shawl, or what was left of it, lay near the door, torn and clawed almost beyond recognition. I'm McLeod the Bard, and you're listening to CFRU 93.3 FM. Now, dear listener, I don't know about you, but I think I have had quite enough spooky thoughts to think about. Having ensured that one and all of us will have nightmares this night, whether it be the haunting fate of the Lord's daughter, or the vicious ghost that Oiwa became, or the dread of our next community meeting being populated by the local dead, I have no doubt that a peaceful sleep will not be ours tonight. I can even see it now. All the written complaints addressed to me tomorrow morning for all the sleep deprivation I've caused with my selection of frightening tales. Alas, I did warn you, my dear listener, of what lay ahead, and that MacLeod the Bard could not be held responsible for the mortal fear caused by his stories. But perhaps I can offer something to alleviate that malady with the time we have left tonight. After all, not every story needs to cause our heart to skip a beat, and as it so happens, I have a story that may just make yours grow a size or two this night. This is a tale that you all know well, though you may not have heard it told in quite a while. With Christmas not far behind us, this was one I had transcribed to my storybook. And, wouldn't you know it, just days later, a fellow CFRU member asked me if I had that very story. Of course, being the proper bard that I am, I told her that when the time had come for me to broadcast it, that I would dedicate it to her. And so, this one is for you, nameless axe thrower of the flaming hair. This is the Grinch who stole Christmas. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch, who lived just north of Whoville, did not. The Grinch hated Christmas, the whole Christmas season. Now please, don't ask why. No one quite knows the reason. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be, perhaps, that his shoes were too tight. But I think that the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. Whatever the reason, his heart or his shoes, he stood there on Christmas Eve, hating the Whos, staring down from his cave with a sour, grinchy frown at the warm lighted windows below in their town. For he knew every Who down in Whoville beneath was busy now hanging a mistletoe wreath. "And they're hanging their stockings," he snarled with a sneer. "Tomorrow is Christmas. It's practically here." Then he growled, with his Grinch fingers nervously drumming, "I must find a way to stop Christmas from coming." For tomorrow he knew all the Who girls and boys would wake bright and early. They'd rush for their toys. And then, oh, the noise! Oh, the noise! Noise, noise, noise! That's one thing he hated, the noise! Noise, noise, noise! Then the Whos, young and old, would sit down to feast, and they'd feast, and they'd feast, and they'd feast. They would feast on Who pudding and rare Who roast beast, which was something the Grinch couldn't stand in the least. And then they'd do something he liked least of all. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, would stand close together, with Christmas bells ringing. They'd stand hand in hand, and the Whos would start singing. And they'd sing, and they'd sing, and they'd sing. Sing, sing, sing. And the more the Grinch thought of this Who Christmas sing, the more the Grinch thought, I must stop this whole thing. Why, for 53 years I've put up with it now. I must stop this Christmas from coming. But how? Then he got an idea, an awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea. I know just what to do. The Grinch laughed in his throat, and he made a quick Santa Claus hat and a coat. And he chuckled and clucked. What a great Grinchy trick! With this coat and this hat, I look just like Saint Nick. All I need is a reindeer. The Grinch looked around, but since reindeer are scarce, there was none to be found. Did that stop the old Grinch? No, the Grinch simply said, if I can't find a reindeer, I'll make one instead. So he called his dog Max. Then he took some red thread, and he tied a big horn on top of his head. Then he loaded some bags and old empty sacks on a ramshackle sleigh, and he hitched up old Max. Then the Grinch said, "Giddy up!" and the sleigh started down towards the homes where the Whos lay a snooze in their town. All their windows were dark, quiet snow filled the air. All the Whos were all dreaming sweet dreams without care. When he came to that first little house on the square, "This is stop number 1," the old Grinchy Claus hissed, and he climbed to the roof, empty bags in fist. Then he slid down the chimney, a rather tight pinch, but if Santa could do it, then so could the Grinch. He got stuck only once, for a moment or two, then he stuck his head out of the fireplace flue, where the little Who stockings all hung in a row. "These stockings," he grinned, "will be the first to go." Then he slithered and slunk, a smile most unpleasant, around the whole room, and he took every present. Pop guns and bicycles, roller skates, drums, checkerboards, tricycles, popcorn and plums. And he stuffed them in bags. Then the Grinch, very nimbly, stuffed all the bags one by one up the chimney. Then he slunk to the icebox as quick as a flash. Why, that Grinch even took their last can of Who hash. Then he stuffed all the food up the chimney with glee. "And now," grinned the Grinch, "I will stuff up the tree." And the Grinch grabbed the tree and he started to shove, when he heard a small sound like the coo of a dove. He turned around fast, and he saw a small Who, little Cindy Lou Who was not more than 2. The Grinch had been caught by this tiny Who daughter, who'd got out of bed for a cup of cold water. She stared at the Grinch and said, "Santa Claus, why? Why are you taking our Christmas tree, why?" But you know, that old Grinch was so smart and so slick. He thought up a lie, and he thought it up quick. "Why, my little sweet tot," the fake Santa Claus lied, "there's a light on this tree that won't light on one side. So I'm taking it home to my workshop, my dear. I'll fix it up there, then I'll bring it back here." And his fib fooled the child. Then he patted her head, and he got her a drink, and he sent her to bed. And when Cindy Lou Who went to bed with her cup, he went to the chimney and stuffed the tree up. Then the last thing he took was the log for their fire. Then he went up the chimney himself, the old liar. On the walls he left nothing but the hooks and the wire. And the one speck of food that he left in the house was a crumb that was even too small for a mouse. Then he did the same thing to the other Whos' houses, leaving crumbs much too small for the other Whos' mouses. It was 1/4 past dawn, all the Whos still abed, all the Whos still a snooze when he packed up his sled, packed it up with their presents, the ribbons, the wrappings, the tags and the tinsel, the trimmings, the trappings. 3,000 feet up the side of Mount Crumpet, he rode with his load up the tip-top to dump it. "Pooh-pooh to the Whos," he was Grinchishly humming. They're finding out now that no Christmas is coming. They're just waking up. I know just what they'll do. Their mouths will hang open a minute or two. Then the Who's down in Whoville will cry a boo-hoo. There's a noise, grinned the Grinch, that I must simply hear. So he paused, and the Grinch put a hand to his ear. And he did hear a sound rising over the snow. It started in low, then it started to grow. But the sound wasn't sad. Why, the sound sounded merry. It couldn't be so. But it was merry, very. He stared down at Whoville. The Grinch popped his eyes. Then he shook. What he saw was a shocking surprise. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came. Somehow or other, it came just the same. And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he puzzled 3 hours until his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. And what happened then? Well, in Whoville they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day. And the minute his heart didn't feel quite so tight, he whizzed with his load through the bright morning light. And he brought back the toys and the food for the feast. And he himself, the Grinch, carved the roast beef. Now, if that's not a tale to enlarge the heart, I don't know what is. I'm sure we've all met a Grinch or two in our time, and in our time, I'm sure that we've all been a Grinch once or twice, whether it's because our shoes were too tight, or maybe our head wasn't screwed on just right. I hope that each of you was able to ungrinchify yourselves, and we, in our turn, must then be patient with other Grinches who have not quite made their shoes fit just right. Sometimes we'll want to screw their head on extra tight. Alas, the work of the heart can only be done within. Now, my dear listeners, my stories this day have come to an end. Thank you for sharing your time and your ears with me on this fine winter night. I hope that before long, our paths will cross again, and we will have the opportunity to share stories with each other once more. Although I have a large selection of my own, I am happy to take requests and to learn of the stories that matter most to my beloved listeners. Until such a time, I will leave you with my final offering of music. I am MacLeod the Bard, and you're listening to CFRU 93.3 FM. Good night and sweet dreams to all of my beloved listeners. Thank you for sharing your night with me. Until next time, I am McLeod the Bard, and you're listening to CFRU 93.3 FM.